Hey everyone, I'm Bob, and we're producing a series of videos called How to Pastor. We want to help you just have some practical tips and knowing how to do your craft better. And this first set of videos that we're going to do is all about how to conduct a funeral. We'll talk about putting together the funeral service, talk about putting together a funeral sermon, talk about my dog. We'll talk about a graveside service, all types of elements. But today, we're going to start with how to meet with a family. Now, when we meet with a family, I'm not talking about that first moment of crisis, like when you've met them in the hospital when a tragedy has happened, or maybe at their home after the event. What I'm talking about is that initial time that you sit down with them specifically to talk about the funeral service. There's a handful of things that I think are good to do that will be helpful for you as well. First thing I do is simply empathize with the family. Don't minimize their loss. Don't soften the tragedy. I often simply tell them that, yeah, I think it's horrible. I think it's terrible what has happened to them. And legitimately and sensitively just empathize with the situation that they're in. I think that's a very important element when first getting together with the family. Second thing that you need to do is to actually begin to make your way through crafting the funeral service. What I often do with a family, it can be overwhelming for them to just kind of whiteboard and out of the blue to come up with the elements of a service. So I typically bring with me a sample order of service and kind of let them know that each of the elements in there are plug and play, that there's no set way to do a funeral, that they can add elements in it, they can take them out. Usually a basic order of service includes just a welcome that's done by the pastor. Sometimes the obituary is read or a brief life of the deceased. Poems or songs sung by the congregation can be done in that service. One thing that I'm often very sensitive to is people who want to share during the funeral service. Now here's the difficulty. Everybody has that awkward person in their family who kind of overshares or who doesn't know how to stop. You kind of want to control that a little bit in managing the funeral service. So often what I do with a family is I'll ask them if there's some people who might want to share some stories, and then I'll ask them to have those stories written down by those family members. It gives me an opportunity to briefly look at it, to edit it a little bit, to make sure that they're not going off the rails in what they're saying. And also, I always steer away from open mic. Open mic can just get really unwieldy. Again, often there's a person who doesn't know how to shut down the conversation. Sometimes the time of the service can just be overly expanded. And we want to be sensitive to guests' time. Often people are taking time off of work or out of their day in order to come and sympathize with the family and to honor them. And part of our job as a pastor is to manage that to that time well. So sometimes, and usually, open mic is not the best idea. Some other elements, obviously, there's the sermon that you'll want to plug in there. Depending on the funeral home that you're using or the church that you might be using, sometimes some sort of video montage or picture montage can be played during the service. But all I'm trying to say is, bottom line is you need to come with a sample order of service for the family. It makes their job a lot easier. I usually give them a deadline to get that back to me with sensitivity. You know, by Thursday night, 2 days from now, or tomorrow night, if you can kind of email back to me what you'd like to do, I think that's helpful for the family as well. So empathize with the family, give them a sample of order of service. And then the last thing that you need to do is to talk about the deceased. This is your opportunity to really begin to connect with the family and also to hear some of those elements you might need to hear in order to craft a very personal funeral sermon. And we'll talk about that in another video. But often when I talk about the deceased, there's many ways to go about this. Sometimes you can just go by time ranges. Tell me what they were like when they were little, or tell me what they were like in high school. Tell me what they were like as a young adult, and just kind of hit different age epochs in their life. Other ways you can do it is just by having a fistful of leading questions. I've heard of pastors who will kind of go around the room with other family that are there and just say, give me 3 words, give me 4 words that describe your father or your uncle, whoever the deceased is. And then to just ask follow-up questions about that. Oh, I heard you said that he was very giving. Can you give me some examples of that? Give me examples of is a great follow-up to just about any question. Oh, he was very humble. Oh, can you give me some examples of that? And that information that you're hearing from them is really the field that you need to be tilling in order to dig out some of those vital items that you'll be using in your funeral sermon. And we'll touch on that in another video. For now, that just gives you 3 basics in how to interact with the family. Empathize. Let them know the tragedy is horrible. Don't minimize the pain there. To give them a sample order of service, and then finally to also find out about the deceased. And then lastly, you never want to leave without giving them hope. Even in the midst of the tragedy, you want to tell them that God is good, God is kind, God is wise, He knows exactly what He's doing, even though things look so dark right now. I often close in prayer with them, and then of course give them the next time that you'll meet with them, whether that's the next couple days at the funeral home or another contact time. There you go. That's how to initially meet with a family, and be sure to catch us for some of our other videos on how to pastor.